I watched Marcus's face drain of color as the social worker handed him the emergency removal notice, and I felt nothing but the cool satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. "This is insane," he sputtered, looking between Linda Chen from Child Protective Services and the police officer standing at his apartment door. "My ex-wife is trying to set me up. She's always hated that I got weekend custody." "Mr. Patterson," Linda interrupted, her voice professionally neutral but her eyes hard. "This is the third substantiated complaint in as many months. We're legally obligated to remove the children from your care until a full investigation is complete." I stood behind them in the hallway, holding Mia's hand while Jake pressed against my side. They didn't cry. They didn't protest. They'd learned in the last 12 weeks exactly who their father was. And unlike in my first life, I'd been there to protect them through every revelation. "You can't do this," Marcus said, his voice rising to that pitch I knew so well, the one that came right before he threw something. The officer's hand moved subtly toward his belt. "Sarah, tell them this is bullshit." I met his eyes and let him see what I'd kept hidden for 3 months. Not the broken woman he'd crushed in our first life. Not the desperate mother who'd lost her children in a custody battle rigged by his lawyer father and family money. Not the woman who died alone in a cheap apartment, drowning in pills and vodka, 6 months after a judge decided that Marcus Patterson's career and stable home environment mattered more than the fact that he'd never changed a diaper in his life. No. I let him see the woman who'd opened her eyes on the morning of January 3rd, 2024, in our marital bed with his phone buzzing with messages from his mistress and realized she'd been given the rarest gift in the universe, a second chance. "I think," I said quietly, "you should comply with CPS, Marcus. The children need to be somewhere safe." That was 4 hours ago. Now we were back in my apartment, the small two-bedroom I'd rented the day after I'd filed for divorce this time around, instead of the studio I'd been forced into before when his lawyers had frozen our assets. Mia was watching cartoons, Jake was doing homework at the kitchen table, and I was sitting on my bed with my laptop, adding the final documentation to the file that would end Marcus's parental rights permanently. In my first life, I'd be mean by in his first life, I'd believed him when he said he wanted the kids. I'd believed him when he said he'd changed. I'd believed his lawyer when they painted me as an unstable, vindictive ex-wife who couldn't accept that the marriage was over. I'd believed the judge when he said that children needed their father. I'd believed until Mia had called me, sobbing, at 3 in the morning from Marcus's apartment, saying Daddy wouldn't wake up and Jake was scared. Until I'd found out my 7-year-old son had been putting himself to bed, making his own breakfast and keeping his 5-year-old sister quiet so Daddy could sleep off his hangovers. Until the school had called to say Jake had been falling asleep in class and Mia had been stealing food from other kids' lunchboxes. By the time I'd gotten back to court, Marcus's father had hired 3 different experts to testify that the children were fine, that I was exaggerating, that Marcus was making parenting adjustments. The judge had been his father's college roommate. I never stood a chance. I'd gotten the kids back to weekdays only. Marcus had kept every weekend and half the summer, just enough time to traumatize them slowly, to teach Jake that he was the man of the house at 7 years old, to let Mia learn that love meant being ignored unless you were perfectly convenient. And me? I'd spiraled, lost my job, lost my apartment, lost myself. I'd died with their photos clutched in my hands and their last voicemails unheard on my phone because I couldn't bear to listen to them call me from their father's apartment and know I couldn't help them. Then I'd woken up. The same bed, the same date, the same phone buzzing with the same messages from the same mistress, but not the same me. I picked up my phone now and scrolled to the folder I'd labeled evidence. 3 months of careful, methodical documentation. But first I scrolled past it to the photo I'd taken that morning I'd woken up again. January 3rd, 2024. A selfie, my face pale and stunned, with Marcus's sleeping form visible behind me and his phone screen reflected in the mirror showing Amber's text. "Can't wait to finally tell everyone about us. You promised after the holidays." I'd stared at that reflection for 30 minutes, my mind reeling through possibilities. A dream, a delusion, a psychotic break? Then Mia had toddled in, rubbing her eyes, and said, "Mama, I had a bad dream." And I'd pulled her into my arms and felt her solid warmth and her tiny heartbeat. And I'd known. I'd known it was real. I'd known I'd been given something impossible. I'd known I wasn't going to waste it. The first thing I did was copy every message on Marcus's phone, every text from Amber, the paralegal at his firm, every email about the offshore account his father had helped him set up, every Google search for how to get full custody and wife drug problem proof that showed he'd been planning to destroy me for months. The second thing I did was go see a lawyer, not the family practice attorney I'd used before, the one who'd been overworked, underpaid, and outmaneuvered at every turn. No, I went to see Catherine Wu, the cutthroat divorce attorney whose name I'd only learned about in my first life when Marcus's father had mentioned, drunk at Christmas, that they'd made sure I couldn't afford her. This time, I could. Because this time, I'd emptied half our savings account before Marcus knew we were getting divorced. Because this time, I knew exactly which laws protected a spouse who took money for legitimate purposes like securing legal counsel and establishing a separate household for dependent children. Because I'd lived through being destitute once, and I'd be damned if I let it happen again. Catherine had looked at the evidence I brought her, all of it, including the messages I'd printed at a FedEx store because I wasn't stupid enough to use our home printer, and she'd smiled. "Your husband," she'd said, "is about to have a very bad year." She'd been understating it. I'd filed for divorce on January 10th, exactly 1 week after waking up. Marcus had been shocked that I'd somehow discovered his affair. He'd tried to spin it, tried to say I was overreacting, tried to suggest counseling. I'd looked him in the eye and said, "I'm done, and you're going to give me exactly what I'm asking for in this custody arrangement, or Catherine Wu is going to make sure everyone at your father's firm knows about the offshore account." His face had gone white. "You can't prove—" "I can prove all of it, Marcus. Every text, every transfer, every lie you've told our children about why Daddy works late." He'd signed the preliminary agreement that gave me primary custody with his weekends. His lawyer, not his father, not this time, because I'd made it clear that involving Judge Patterson would mean I'd go to the state bar about his creative interpretation of conflict of interest rules, had tried to push for more. But I'd had Catherine, and Catherine didn't lose. The custody arrangement had been simple. I got weekdays, Marcus got weekends. Friday evening pickup, Sunday evening return. Standard divorced dad schedule. Except I knew something Marcus couldn't remember because he hadn't lived it yet. Marcus Patterson was a terrible father. In our first life, I'd fought that reality. I'd covered for him. I'd dropped everything when he called saying he couldn't handle both kids. I'd switched weekends when he had work trips. I'd made excuses to Jake and Mia when their father forgot birthdays, showed up late, or pawned them off on whatever girlfriend he was trying to impress that month. I'd enabled him, and my children had suffered for it. This time, I did exactly what the custody agreement said. Nothing more, nothing less. The first weekend, I'd dropped them off at 6 p.m. on Friday as specified. Marcus had looked hungover and surprised to see me. "Oh shit, is it Friday already?" "It's your weekend," I'd said pleasantly. "Per the agreement. I'll be back at 6 p.m. Sunday." "Wait, Sarah, I have this thing tomorrow." "That sounds like a you problem. See you Sunday." I'd driven away with my stomach in knots, every motherly instinct screaming at me to turn around. But I'd learned something in my first life, in those terrible months before I died. Sometimes loving your children means letting them see who the other parent really is. Jake had called me 17 times that weekend. I'd answered once, per day, as the agreement specified for wellness checks. Both times, I'd kept my voice calm and reassuring. "Mama, Dad says he can't make dinner and we should just have cereal." "That's fine, honey. Cereal is a perfectly good dinner sometimes." "But there's no milk, and he won't go to the store." "Did you tell your dad you need milk?" "He says he's busy." "I see. Well, baby, you're at your dad's house this weekend. That means your dad is in charge, but I want you to remember everything that happens, okay? Can you do that for me?" "Okay, Mama." "I love you too much, Jake. I'll see you Sunday." When I'd picked them up Sunday evening, they'd looked tired. Mia's hair hadn't been brushed. Jake was wearing the same clothes I'd dropped him off in. Marcus had handed them over with obvious relief. "They're exhausting," he'd said, like he expected sympathy. I don't know how you do this every day. Practice, I'd said. Then louder for the benefit of my phone recording in my pocket. Did you guys have fun with Dad? Mia had looked at Jake. Jake had looked at his feet. It was okay, Jake had said finally. At home, I'd given them baths, made them a real dinner, and let them talk. And they'd talked about how Dad had mostly been on his phone, how they'd had to be really quiet because his head hurt, how he'd ordered pizza but then forgotten to actually order it, and by the time Jake had reminded him, it was 9 p.m. How Mia had been scared in the night and Dad had told her to go back to bed and stop being a baby. I'd written it all down, every word, and I'd called Jake's school on Monday and asked them to document his appearance and demeanor, called Mia's preschool and done the same. Building a case isn't about one spectacular failure. It's about pattern and practice. It's about documentation. It's about being patient. The second weekend had been worse. Marcus had taken them to his new girlfriend's place, Amber, of course, though they were supposedly keeping it quiet. He'd left them there while he went to play golf. Amber, who'd never wanted kids and had told Marcus as much in the texts I'd screenshotted, had parked Mia and Jake in front of the TV for 6 hours with a bag of chips. When Jake had asked for lunch, she'd told him to make sandwiches. My 7-year-old had made peanut butter sandwiches for himself and his sister, and then when Mia had spilled juice on Amber's white couch, Amber had screamed at her until she cried. Jake had called me, whispering, "Mama, can you come get us?" "Baby, it's not my weekend. I can't just come get you unless there's an emergency." It feels like an emergency. My heart had broken. Again. Just like it had broken in my first life when I'd been powerless to help them. But I wasn't powerless this time. I was just patient. "Is anyone hurt? Are you safe?" I guess, but Mia is crying and Dad's not here, and his girlfriend is really mean. "Okay, I'm going to call your dad right now, but Jake, I need you to be my big brave boy and remember everything that happens. Can you do that?" "I'm always your big brave boy." "I know you are. I love you so much." I'd called Marcus. He hadn't answered. I'd texted, "Jake called. He's upset. Where are you?" 2 hours later, golf ran long. "They're fine. Stop helicoptering." I'd documented all of it. The timestamp of Jake's call, Marcus's text, the fact that he'd left 2 elementary-aged children with a stranger for 6 hours without checking in, and I'd called my pediatrician and asked for an appointment Monday morning, citing emotional distress after weekend visits with father. Dr. Sarah Okafor had known my kids since birth. She'd seen Jake's anxiety manifest as stomach aches before. She'd noted Mia's regression in speech after particularly stressful events. When I'd brought them in, and they'd both been withdrawn, when Jake had flinched at a sudden noise and Mia had clutched her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline, Dr. Okafor had documented it all. "Sarah," she'd said quietly while the kids were with her nurse getting stickers. "What's going on?" "I'm documenting," I'd said. "His weekends." She'd looked at me for a long moment. "If you need me to testify to anything, I observe in my capacity as their physician. I'll let you know." The third weekend had been the charm. Marcus had been annoyed when I dropped them off. I could see it in the tight line of his mouth, the way he barely looked at the kids as they brought their overnight bags in. "You know, Sarah, you could be more flexible. I might have plans sometimes. The agreement says alternating weekends. This is your weekend." "Yeah, but you don't have to be such a hard ass about it. We could work together." "We are working together, according to the legally binding agreement your lawyer negotiated. See you Sunday at 6. I'd later learned from Jake that Marcus had been planning to go to Amber's parents' lake house that weekend. He'd been planning to leave the kids with his mother, but I'd dropped them off and his mother had her book club retreat, and Amber's parents hadn't known he had kids, and Marcus had found himself stuck in his apartment with 2 children and no plan. He'd tried to make it work. I'd give him that much. He'd taken them to the park for 45 minutes before he got bored. He'd ordered takeout and then yelled at them for being picky eaters when they didn't like his choice of Thai food with peanut sauce. Mia was allergic to peanuts, which he'd known since she was 2, which was documented in every medical record I'd provided him, which he'd apparently never read. The allergic reaction had been mild, just hives and an itchy throat, because Jake had realized immediately and forced his sister to spit everything out, then called me in a panic. Mama, Dad gave me a peanuts and she's got the bumpy skin. Is her throat closing? Is she breathing okay? She's breathing, but she says it's scratchy. Jake, you need to tell your dad right now that Mia needs her EpiPen. It's in the red bag I packed. Can you do that? Dad's in the bathroom. Then you get the EpiPen. I'll stay on the phone. You remember how to use it? Like you taught me. Good boy, I'm coming right now. Call 911 if she gets worse. I'd broken every speed limit getting there. Marcus had still been in the bathroom. Apparently his Thai food hadn't agreed with him either. When I'd burst through the door using the key he'd forgotten I'd had copied from his keychain. Jake had the EpiPen ready but hadn't needed to use it. Mia's reaction had been subsiding thanks to the Benadryl Jake had found in the first aid kit. Of course, Marcus didn't have children's Benadryl, so Jake had given her a quarter of an adult tablet like I'd taught him in case of emergency. I'd scooped Mia up and checked her over thoroughly while Jake hovered anxiously. Marcus had finally emerged from the bathroom. What the hell are you doing here? Saving our daughter's life since you apparently tried to kill her with peanut sauce. I didn't know. It's on every medical form I've ever filled out. It's in the allergy list I gave your lawyer. It's written in permanent marker on the medical information sheet in her overnight bag that you clearly never looked at. I'd taken pictures of the Thai food containers with peanut sauce clearly listed on the label, of Mia's hives, of the empty apartment with dishes in the sink and no child-safe medication in the bathroom cabinet, of Jake's pale, terrified face and the EpiPen still clutched in his hand. I'm taking them to the ER to get checked out, I'd said. You'll get my lawyer's report tomorrow. Sarah, come on, it was an accident. An accident, I'd said coldly, is something that happens despite reasonable precautions. This was negligence. I'd filed the CPS report that night. Not because I expected them to act on one incident. I knew how the system worked, how they were overloaded and understaffed and more focused on cases of active abuse, but because I needed it documented. Report number 1, the next weekend I'd been required by the custody agreement to return the children to Marcus's care. He'd been defensive and angry. You're trying to ruin my relationship with my kids. No, Marcus, I'm trying to keep them alive. There's a difference. Jake had been even more anxious this time. At 10 years old in my first life, he'd basically been Marcus's parent. At 7 now, he was just a scared kid who'd realized his dad couldn't be trusted. Do I have to go? He'd asked me privately. Baby, I'm working on it, but right now, yes. The judge said you have to, but remember, you're my brave boy. You watch out for your sister. You call me if anything happens, and you remember everything. I always remember everything, he'd said. Then, quieter. I wish you could come. Me too, baby. Me too. That weekend, Marcus had taken them to a company picnic. He'd been drinking, day drinking, with a cocktail in his hand by noon, documented in the photos his own coworkers had posted on Facebook and tagged him in. He'd lost track of the kids for over an hour while he'd been schmoozing with his boss. A kind stranger had found Mia crying by the lake, looking for her daddy, and had taken her to the event organizers. They'd called Marcus's phone 14 times before he'd finally noticed. They'd called the emergency contact on file, which was still me because Marcus was terrible at paperwork. I'd been there in 20 minutes. Your son is fine. He's with the face painting, the organizer had told me, his voice tight with disapproval. But your daughter was very distressed. We almost called the police. Thank you so much for watching out for her. I'm so sorry. Ma'am, is everything okay at home? Because a 5-year-old shouldn't be wandering a public park alone. I'd wanted to scream that everything was not okay, that their father was a selfish bastard who cared more about his career than his children. But I'd kept my voice level. We're divorced. This is his weekend. I'll be speaking to my lawyer. Marcus had shown up 15 minutes later, red-faced and slurring slightly. There you are. Everyone's looking for you, Mia Bear. She was looking for you, I'd said, while you were getting drunk at a work event. I had 2 beers, Sarah. Jesus. The organizer had cleared his throat. Sir, I personally served you 3 cocktails, 2 beers, and a shot. I'm the bartender. Marcus's face had gone white. CPS report number 2, filed by me with witness statements from the bartender and event organizer. Filed by the event organizer independently because they'd been so concerned. 2 reports, same incident, both substantiated. The social worker assigned to the case, Linda Chen, who I'd later learn had 17 years of experience and a reputation for not taking any shit, had called me and asked to interview the children. I'd agreed immediately. I'd also provided her with copies of every piece of documentation I'd collected. The first weekend's neglect, the second weekend's exposure to hostile environment, the peanut allergy incident, and now the loss of supervision while intoxicated. Mrs. Patterson, Linda had said, I need you to understand that we take these reports seriously, but we also see a lot of parents weaponizing CPS against their exes. I understand. Interview my children, talk to their pediatrician, their teachers, their preschool provider. Check my records against his. If I'm lying or exaggerating, you'll see it. She had. And she'd seen that I wasn't. Jake had told her in his careful 7-year-old way about being hungry and dad being too busy, about Mia's hives and the scratchy throat, about being lost at the picnic and being scared. Mia had been less verbal, but had shown Linda her drawings from art therapy at school. Dark, scribbled pictures of a big person with an angry face and 2 small people hiding. Who is this? Linda had asked gently. That's Daddy when he's mad. Mia had said the pediatrician had provided records of the increased anxiety symptoms. The school had documented Jake's exhaustion and difficulty concentrating after weekends with his father. The preschool had noted Mia's regression in social skills. Linda had called Marcus in for an interview. I'd later heard from Catherine that he'd shown up 30 minutes late, been defensive and hostile, and blamed everything on me being a vindictive ex-wife. And the peanut allergy incident? Linda had asked. She barely reacted. Sarah's exaggerating. There are photos of visible hives and witness testimony from your son that your daughter's throat was closing. Jake's 7. He doesn't know. So you're saying your 7-year-old son is more attentive to your daughter's medical emergencies than you are? The interview had not gone well for Marcus, but it still hadn't been enough. 2 substantiated reports meant monitoring, meant supervision recommendations, meant Marcus had to attend a parenting class. It didn't mean removal. It didn't mean I got what I needed. Full custody and him gone from our lives. So there'd been a 3rd weekend. I hadn't wanted to send them back. Everything in me had screamed against it. But Catherine had been clear. If you want to prove he's unfit, you need to let him prove it. 1 more incident and we can file for emergency custody modification. How many times do my kids have to be scared? Or hungry or unsafe? I'd asked. I know, I'm sorry, but the system is shit. The system is shit, she'd agreed. But it's the system we have to work within. So I'd packed their bags again. I'd hugged them tight. I'd whispered to Jake, remember everything, baby. This is the last time. I promise. Marcus had been cold when he'd picked them up, clearly angry about the CPS investigation. You happy now? Making me jump through hoops like I'm some kind of criminal? I'm just following the custody agreement, Marcus. Bullshit. You're trying to turn them against me. I don't have to turn them against you. You're doing that yourself. He'd slammed the door in my face. I'd gone home and I'd paced. I'd checked my phone every 5 minutes. I'd second-guessed everything. And then, at 11 p.m. on Saturday night, Jake had called. Mama? His voice had been very small. Mama, something's wrong with Dad. My blood had turned to ice. Wrong how, baby? He's on the couch and he won't wake up and there's bottles everywhere and Mia's scared. Are you safe? Can you lock yourselves in a bedroom? We're in the bedroom now. Good boy. Stay there. Lock the door. I'm calling 911 and I'm coming right now. Do not open that door for anyone but the police or me, okay? Okay, Mama, please hurry. I'd called 911 first, then Linda Chen, who I'd been told could be reached 24/7 for emergencies. Then Catherine. Then I'd driven to Marcus's apartment going 90 miles an hour and praying not to get pulled over. The paramedics had been there when I'd arrived, and 2 police officers. Marcus had been passed out drunk on the couch, unresponsive enough that they'd been preparing to transport him to the hospital. The apartment had been a disaster. Empty bottles, spilled alcohol, no food in the fridge, no indication he'd fed the kids dinner. Jake and Mia had been locked in the bedroom, terrified. I'd gathered them up and held them while they'd cried. "I'm sorry, Mama," Jake had sobbed. "I tried to wake him up, but he wouldn't wake up and I didn't know what to do." "You did perfect, baby. You did exactly right. You kept your sister safe and you called me. You're so brave." Linda Chen had arrived shortly after, taken one look at the scene, and made a call. Within 2 hours, she'd had emergency custody removal paperwork. Within 4 hours, Marcus had been awake enough to be served with notice that his children were being removed from his care pending investigation. Within 6 hours, I'd been back in my apartment with my kids asleep in their beds and a court date scheduled for the following week. That had been 3 days ago. Now, sitting on my bed with my laptop, I was preparing the case that would end Marcus's custody for good. Catherine had already filed for an emergency hearing to modify custody. Linda Chen would be testifying about the pattern of neglect and endangerment. Dr. Okafor would testify about the children's increased anxiety and trauma symptoms. The school and preschool had provided written statements, and I had my documentation. Every text, every call log, every photo, every witness statement, every piece of evidence that Marcus Patterson was exactly what I'd known he was in my first life. A man who wanted the title of father without doing any of the work. My phone rang. Catherine. "Sarah, I just got off the phone with Marcus's lawyer. They want to negotiate." "No." "Hear me out. They're offering to voluntarily reduce his custody to supervised visitation only, in exchange for you dropping the petition to terminate his parental rights." "Absolutely not." "Sarah, supervised visitation means he can never take them alone again. He'd have to pay for a supervisor out of pocket. He'd have to follow strict guidelines. For all practical purposes, he'd still be in their lives. Still be able to hurt them, still be able to disappoint them. No, I want full legal and physical custody, and I want him to have zero rights." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "That's a very high bar. Judges don't like to terminate parental rights unless there's abuse or abandonment." "He passed out drunk while supervising 2 elementary-age children. He left them alone and terrified. He fed my daughter food she's deathly allergic to. He lost them in a public park. If that's not abuse and abandonment, what is?" "I agree with you. I'm just saying the judge might not." "Then we make him agree." "What's Marcus's weak point?" "His career, his father's reputation. He's up for partner at the firm in this kind of scandal?" I smiled. "Then let's make sure everyone knows I'm done protecting him." In my first life, I'd stayed quiet. I'd been ashamed, like somehow Marcus's failures as a father reflected on me. I'd protected his reputation because I'd thought I was protecting my kids from the stigma of having a deadbeat dad. But my kids had suffered anyway, and Marcus had faced no consequences. Not this time. I'd already drafted the Facebook post, the email to his law firm's partners, the message to his mother detailing every single weekend and every single failure. I'd held on to them, waiting for the right moment. That moment was now. "Send me the settlement offer in writing," I told Catherine. "I'll respond tomorrow." I hung up and opened my laptop. But before I could start writing my response, there was a knock at my door. I checked the peephole. "Marcus." I opened the door but left the chain on. "You shouldn't be here. I need to see my kids." "You're not supposed to have contact outside of supervised visits," Linda was clear. "Sarah, please." His voice cracked. "Please, I fucked up." "I know I fucked up." "But they're my kids." "And you left them alone while you drank yourself unconscious." "I'm an alcoholic." He said it like it was an explanation, like it made everything okay. "I'm sick. I need help not to have my children taken away." "You've had every opportunity to get help. You've had 3 months of watching your weekends fall apart. You've had CPS knocking on your door twice. You've had me begging you to take this seriously." "I didn't think you were serious about protecting our children." "You didn't think I was serious about protecting our children?" He slumped against the doorframe. He looked terrible, unshaven, bloodshot eyes, clothes wrinkled. He looked like I'd looked in my first life. In those last months before I died, I felt nothing, no sympathy, no residual love, nothing but the cold calculation of someone who'd already mourned this man once and had no intention of doing it again. What do you want, Marcus? I want my family back. You never had a family. You had accessories. People you could trot out for your parents at holidays and ignore the rest of the time. People you could use to prove you were a grown-up while acting like a child. That's not fair. You want to know what's not fair? What's not fair is that Jake has nightmares about you dying because he can't wake you up. What's not fair is that Mia draws pictures of herself hiding from you. What's not fair is that our children are in therapy at ages 7 and 5 because their father can't be bothered to actually parent them. I can change. I can go to rehab. You can sign this papers terminating your parental rights, or you can fight this in court and lose. Those are your options. His face hardened. The self-pity disappeared, replaced by the Marcus I knew better, the one who hated to lose more than he loved his children. You think you're so smart. You think you've won. But my father is a judge who's already recused himself from this case because of the massive conflict of interest. In fact, if you involve him at all, I've been advised I can file a complaint with the state bar about his previous involvement in our custody case. Something about ex parte communications and abuse of judicial position. I'd learned that in my first life too late. This time, I'd learned it early enough to matter. Marcus's face went white. You wouldn't. Try me. Now get off my doorstep before I call the police for violation of the no contact order. There will be in about 30 seconds when I file for one. Want to see how fast I can type? He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe the Sarah he'd married, the one who'd believed in compromise and working together and keeping the peace, had never really existed. Or maybe she'd died in that other timeline, and this Sarah had risen from her ashes. I won't make this easy, he said finally. I don't need easy. I just need to win. He left. I closed the door, locked it, and added Marcus showed up at home in violation of CPS directive for no contact to my documentation. Then I sent the emails. The one to his firm was professional and to the point. A notification that Marcus Patterson was currently under investigation by Child Protective Services for child endangerment and neglect, and that as the custodial parent, I felt obligated to inform them that he might be facing criminal charges depending on the outcome of the investigation. I attached no evidence, just a simple statement of fact. Let them ask him for details. The one to his mother was more personal. I detailed every weekend, every failure, every moment my children had been scared or hungry or unsafe. I ended with, you raised him to believe he's entitled to everything without earning it. Now my children are paying the price. I thought you should know what your son really is. The Facebook post was simplest of all. Grateful for the support of my community as I navigate a difficult custody situation. My children's safety and well-being will always come first. Thank you to CPS, my legal team, and everyone who's helped document the truth. I didn't name Marcus. I didn't have to. We had 300 mutual friends, most of whom knew we were divorced. They'd figure it out. My phone started ringing within minutes. Friends, family, Marcus's sister. I ignored them all. Instead, I went to check on my kids, both asleep, Jacob with his arm around Mia like he was still protecting her. I pulled their blankets up and kissed their foreheads and whispered, never again. No one's ever going to hurt you again. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Catherine filed a motion to expedite on the grounds of imminent danger to the children. The judge, a woman named Elena Rodriguez, who'd been appointed to family court 6 months before and had a reputation for not tolerating bullshit, approved it. Marcus showed up with a new lawyer, not his father, not the fancy firm his family used, a solo practitioner who specialized in hopeless cases. That told me everything I needed to know about how his family had reacted to my email. I showed up with Catherine, with my documentation, and with Linda Chen, who'd agreed to testify. The hearing was scheduled for 2 hours. It lasted 4. Marcus's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive and manipulative. Mrs. Patterson has systematically documented minor parenting missteps in order to build a case for eliminating my client's relationship with his children. Catherine had smiled. Minor parenting missteps? Is that what we're calling leaving 7- and 5-year-old children alone with an unconscious parent who'd drunk themselves into a stupor? The lawyer had pivoted. My client is an alcoholic. He has a disease. He's seeking treatment. We're asking the court to allow him to maintain some form of contact while he completes rehabilitation. Judge Rodriguez had leaned forward. Is he seeking treatment? Right now? Or is this something he's planning to do if it helps him keep custody? He's planning to enter a program. I see, so he wasn't planning to seek treatment after the first CPS report? Or the second? Or after nearly killing his daughter with peanut sauce, despite having written documentation of her allergy? Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson herself acknowledges that incident was an accident that occurred because Mr. Patterson couldn't be bothered to read the medical information provided about his children's health and safety. The judge had looked at her notes. And according to the testimony from the children's pediatrician, the 7-year-old son is the one who identified the allergic reaction and prevented it from becoming life-threatening while Mr. Patterson was in the bathroom. Is that correct? That's one interpretation. Is it correct? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Rodriguez had then listened to Linda Chen's testimony about the pattern of neglect, about the escalating danger to the children, about Marcus's defensive hostility during interviews, and his complete failure to take responsibility for any of his actions. She'd listened to Dr. Okafor describe Jake's anxiety and Mia's nightmares. She'd reviewed the documentation I'd provided, every text message, every photo, every witness statement. And then she'd asked to speak to the children. Catherine had objected. They were so young it would be traumatic, but I'd overruled her. They need to be heard. Jake and Mia had been brought in with a child advocate, Guatemal's. Rodriguez had cleared the courtroom except for the court reporter and the advocate, and she'd spoken to my children for 20 minutes. When they'd brought the kids back out, Jake had been pale but composed. Mia had been clutching her stuffed rabbit. They'd both looked at me, and I'd nodded. You did good. Judge Rodriguez had called us back in. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, and I've spoken with the children at the center of this case. This is what I know. Mr. Patterson has demonstrated a consistent pattern of neglect and endangerment. He has failed to prioritize his children's safety, health, or emotional well-being. He has left them unsupervised, unfed, and in situations where they were at risk of serious harm. He has done this not once, not twice, but repeatedly and has shown no genuine remorse or understanding of the severity of his actions. Marcus had started to stand. His lawyer had pulled him back down. Mrs. Patterson, by contrast, has demonstrated exactly what a responsible parent does. She has documented concerns, followed proper legal channels, cooperated with CPS, and maintained appropriate boundaries. The fact that this documentation exists is not evidence of vindictiveness. It's evidence of due diligence in protecting her children. The judge had looked at Marcus. Mr. Patterson, I have no doubt you love your children in the abstract. But love is not enough. Love without action, without sacrifice, without putting their needs ahead of your convenience is not love at all. It's narcissism. Marcus's face had been red. I am terminating your parental rights effective immediately. Mrs. Patterson is awarded sole legal and physical custody. You will have no visitation rights. If, in the future, you complete a certified addiction treatment program and can demonstrate sustained sobriety and genuine personal growth, you may petition the court to reinstate supervised visitation only, but that will be years from now at minimum, and it will require you to prove, not promise, but prove that you are capable of putting your children first. Your Honor, please. Marcus had stood, his voice breaking. Sit down, Mr. Patterson. You had multiple chances to be the father your children needed. You chose repeatedly not to take those chances. This is the consequence of your choices, not your ex-wife's vindictiveness, not CPS overreach, not bad luck, your choices. The gavel had come down. It was over. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now I was sitting in my newly rented house, bigger than the apartment with a backyard for the kids, watching Jake and Mia play in the afternoon sun. They were louder now, lighter. Jake's nightmares had decreased. Mia had stopped drawing angry faces. They still asked about their dad sometimes. I didn't lie to them or poison them against him. Daddy's sick, I told them. And sometimes when people are sick, they can't take care of other people. That doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It just means he can't be your parent right now. Will he get better? Mia had asked. I don't know, baby. I hope so. And weirdly, I did. Not for Marcus's sake, but for theirs. I hoped someday he'd get his shit together. I hoped someday they could have some version of a relationship with him that didn't hurt them. But if he didn't, they'd be okay because they had me, and this time I wasn't going anywhere. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Marcus filed for appeal. It'll go nowhere, but heads up. I wasn't surprised. Marcus hated to lose. He dragged this out as long as he could, trying to prove some point to himself. But I'd already won. My kids were safe. They were happy. They were healing. Everything else was just paperwork. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not documentation this time, not evidence. A letter. Dear Jake and Mia, you're too young to read this now, but someday you'll be old enough to ask questions about why your father isn't in your life. When that day comes, I'll give you this letter and all the documentation I kept. Not to poison you against him, not to make you hate him, but because you deserve the truth. You deserve to know that you were not abandoned because you weren't good enough or lovable enough. You were protected because you mattered more than anyone's ego or pride or convenience. You deserve to know that I fought for you, not to keep you from him, but to keep you safe. You deserve to know that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is say, not like this, not when it hurts you, not when it breaks you. I got a second chance at this. And I know how rare and impossible and magical that is. But even without a second chance, I hope any parent would make the choices I made. I hope any parent would choose their child's safety over their ex's feelings. I hope any parent would be willing to be called vindictive, manipulative, controlling, and cruel if it meant their children got to sleep safely at night. You are my second chance. You are my reason. You are my everything. And I will never, ever stop fighting for you. Love, Mom. I saved it in the folder with everything else. Someday they'd want to understand. Someday they'd need to know. But today we were going to the park. Today Jake wanted to show me how high he could swing. Today Mia wanted to collect rocks for her museum. Today we were just going to be happy. I'd lived through the worst possible version of this story once. I'd died knowing I'd failed my children, knowing I'd lost them to a man who couldn't be bothered to actually love them. I'd been given an impossible gift, the chance to do it over, the chance to do it right. And I'd taken that chance and turned it into this. 2 happy kids, a fresh start, and a future where they'd never again have to be scared or hungry or unsafe. The doorbell rang. I checked the camera, a delivery. The new bikes I'd ordered for the kids, bright red with training wheels for Mia and Apasas. Big kid bike for Jake. I opened the door and started bringing in the boxes. From the backyard, I heard Mia shriek with laughter and Jake yell, "Mama, come see!" I smiled. In my first life, I'd lost everything and everyone, and ended up alone in a studio apartment with empty bottles and an emptier heart. In this life, I had everything that mattered. I'd rebuilt our family from the ashes of my own death, and this time I'd built it strong enough to last. This time I'd built it on truth and documentation and the willingness to be the bad guy if that's what keeping my kids safe required. This time I'd won. And Marcus could appeal all he wanted. He could rage and cry and play the victim. He could tell everyone who'd listen that his crazy ex-wife had stolen his children. But I had the truth. I had the documentation. I had the court order. Most importantly, I had my kids, and I was never letting go.